Hi there. You are listening to KPCA-LP 103.3, Petaluma, California. And you are here with DG, the 30-something. State of the Union is the name of my show. And I want to start by giving a little bit of background. I've said it many times, so if you've been watching my show for a while, you've heard this over and over. But I did want to say that my show today is called Not Just a Nation of Immigrants, and then talking about health equity locally. And the reason this came to mind, you'll hear very soon one of the reasons it came to mind, but one of the major reasons the show came to mind is because my background's in public health, and we often so much talk about equity, but, in many senses it can be in vain, because I don't think a lot of people understand what equity is, and generally you talk about equality instead of equity. So I've made this graphic, and I always say, I think I've shown it 3 times in the show, and if you're listening, if you're streaming, or if you're on the radio, you're not going to see it. But I always try to describe it, and if you're on Facebook, and if you follow me, you've seen it before. But basically, it shows that equality is providing. So it's 3 little stick people, and they are trying to look over a fence to watch a baseball game. Is the original one. I didn't make it that complex of a graphic, but basically, it's showing that equality is providing 3 people of different heights the same level box, where equity is providing a box for them to stand on based on their height so they can all see over the fence. So I just wanted to start with that. That is the difference between equality and equity. Again, my background's in public health, and we've been talking a lot about equity for some time. Most of the normal rhetoric is about equality when we're talking about equity. So, you can send in questions. I'm not doing the phone today, but you can send in questions, of course, if you're on Facebook. And then if you're not on Facebook and you're listening, you can send them in. You can send them via email to domayne@maberme.com. My show in general is an editorial, but this show, I think even more, is going to be an editorial because it is a very broad subject. It kind of addresses issues that are going on locally or nationally, I should say. But this is something that is an ongoing issue from our day to day. So please send over questions, and even if you don't get them here initially, I am very, very accessible. So please send them over. But I want to start with call it a speech, a talk from Javon Muhammad, and she is quite an amazing woman. She helped start, the clinic was started, but she stepped in to run the Marin City Health and Wellness Center, which has expanded to a birthing center in Centerville, to clinics in the East Bay and San Francisco, the city and county of San Francisco, I believe in the Bayview. I'll talk a little bit more about our relationship after, but I wanted to give some context. So it is 13 minutes, but I think it's incredibly important for everyone to listen to it in its entirety. And I am going to, if you're watching on Facebook, I'm going to move out of the camera screen because it is 13 minutes. However, I posted the YouTube link within the name of the show. So if you kind of just want to watch simultaneously, because there's a reason you're watching the video, right? So you can see it. So you can click on that link and watch the video. But otherwise, you will hear it here. Oh. Okay, we are on community radio. Let me see if I can figure this out. Otherwise, I'm going to be sad. So hold on 1 second. Okay. Hold on. I am definitely missing something. So, aha, I figured it out. There we are. There we are. Okay, figured it out. Right now, you're going to get it.
Conference, right? We're talking about health disparities. But I respect the work of Michelle and I respect the work of Amy. And I decided to come. One of the motivating factors was this may be one of my last chances to be able to make an address like this. I'm moving, I've resigned. I'm Miss Javon, the CEO of Marin City Health and Wellness Center, but I have resigned from that position. My last day will be December 21st, and I will be going to Louisiana. So it really did motivate me to come because I have a few things that I would like to say. I have been blessed to be able to be over amazing programs like the Birth Center that you've seen, like the school and the children that have just talked to you about their experience. I want to say that I stand here today on the shoulders of my mother, who was a crack addict. She was a victim of a state-sponsored program to infiltrate her community with crack cocaine that happened to Black people across the country. I want to say that I stand on the shoulders of my grandmother, who was a maid in Corte Madera in her 20s, Bernice Watkins, Marlena Watkins. I stand on the shoulders of my great-grandmother, Molly Berry, whose mother was a slave, and I was blessed to have her in my life until my 20s. I stand on the shoulders of my grandfather, Bill Watkins, who is a white man, and who had enough love and respect for me to take me for a portion of my life while my mother struggled, and to give me great messaging that allowed me to be able to compete. How many in here know what everyone knows Halloween? We'll just make that assumption. How many know Dia de los Muertos? How many have ever heard of Fete Getty? You did. So there's a couple of hands here. The response that I saw from the audience, I want you to know that that is how it feels to be Black in America. I heard over and over and over today that we are a nation of immigrants. But I have to tell you that all of us didn't get here the same. Our immigration looked a little different. And that has to be said before I move forward in this conversation. Because we enter November, and as part of African traditional religion, or part of African tradition, we enter into a celebration of our ancestors, but you don't know that. Because little is known about the African in America that descends from enslaved people. And so for the portion of this conversation that I move forward in, I'm not talking about immigration, because Black people have immigrated here, right? There are Jamaican immigrants, there are African. I'm talking about the African that was here, that had nowhere to go, and that was a descendant of an enslaved person who cannot stop right now and speak another language to a person that's standing next to them, who cannot be tied by culture that they were able to hang on to. It feels some kind of way to be Black in America, and this specific kind of Black. And I need you to hear that, because today we were celebrating Binational Week, and we can't really participate in that, but everyone said, or most people who spoke said that we're a nation of immigrants. But we can't celebrate Binational Week. We don't have any ties like that. We have the ties that we've made for ourselves. And that feels horrible because we're dwindling in parts of the population in the Bay Area. That feels horrible. I rock with Latinos, and I know that immigration is bigger than Latinos, but that's how we're feeling today. I rock with revolutionary Latinos because I only support people who support me. Because someone said, the sisters that did the presentation earlier said that, Myra said that they never do anything alone. But if you're African American here, you have to learn how to do things alone because we are rarely supported. What's supported is resources, right? So today, my babies that I had come here here because I said, you got to get in this conversation because it's about equity. Ask me, why are we here when we haven't been mentioned at all until Dr. Willis came up? Imagine feeling like that at an equity conference, because that's what I came to speak about today. So I want to have a conversation with my family. Who in here considers themselves a leader in the Latino community? This is a conversation that we are going to have intimately, and then we're going to have greater. Because I lead a clinic. I was at a needs assessment meeting last week, and this has been on my mind for a week. I was at a needs assessment meeting where leadership from clinics came around a table to talk about the needs moving forward in Marin County. Because this meeting, the hospitals put on this kind of survey, and it influences where community benefits funds go. Well, hell, I didn't want to go to that meeting either because we've been punished by Marin General Hospital for the last few years because of a decision we made to open the birth center, and we haven't really benefited off of community benefits funds. So I went with resistance. But I went, and now I want to paint the picture because out of all of the healthcare leadership, no one in the room was Latino. No one. And I came kicking and screaming. I had to stop in the middle of the meeting because the entire meeting was about the needs of undocumented immigrants. Now, I felt a little strange because I rock with undocumented immigrants. I don't have an issue with immigration. I believe it's enough land for everybody, and I support indigenous people coming back to get the land. But how can you sit in a needs meeting in Marin and not realize that Marin City is still there? And there's a group of black people who are there who have been there, and they are documented. They have been there, and for decades, their ancestors and their elders have been fighting for rights here. And the civil rights that they fought for are the rights that we get to talk about today when we look at Section 8 and all of the wonderful things that were said, but not many people mention that today. And that's the story of being black in America, because as the conversation shifts to our Latino family and more resources go that way because there are more people, that's logical, right? We're talking about 25% of the population versus 2. We need you to stand with us in the same way that you ask us to stand with you when we talk about sanctuary cities and DACA and everything else that we line up with, because it's part of being in this weird category called people of color, when you don't really get any benefit when you're 2% of the people of color. And that's not hate, like this is family business. Because as we support you, you gotta come support us. Because you're standing on the shoulders of my grandmother, who was a maid in Corder Madera Burmese Watkins, who was there with the cheap labor before the evil strategy was being developed to use you for cheap labor. Because this little mob that they call it coming from Guatemala has nothing to do with people loving immigrants. It has everything to do with America needing cheap labor and the machine that needs to keep going. And we get so confused with things. If you love people, then you want them to get all that they deserve. Right? I want them to get all that they deserve. I actually think that we should be trying to give them that without having to come here and lose everything. That's a real conversation for me. But since we won't have that, we have to figure out how to look out for each other. And as the Latino population grows and the African American population dwindles, you can't overlook them, because then you're doing the same thing that white people have done to us forever. To come and have a conversation about equity and not be mentioned when we sit at the bottom of all those statistics is not fair. As I leave here, I would like to I spoke with Dr. Colfax last week, and I told him one of my greatest concerns was that I'm leaving, and I feel like we won't be able to address things like that. So I'm leaving, I'm delivering that to all of you, because black people are not only hated by white people in America. There has been a global attack on black people, even within your communities. I know. I wanted the Mexican representative to be here. I went to medical school in the Universidad Xochicalco in Ensenada. If you know me and you follow me on social media, my little 7-month-old Nana is half Salvadoran. I'll be in El Salvador this month. We struggle to survive every population. Every population across the planet, black people are at the bottom because there has been a global campaign to criminalize us since the beginning, to take value from us in darker skin. We don't only suffer here. So what I'm asking my family to do is remember that. As you get more power, remember that. Give us justice, even within your community. Do that. And then we will have equity. Because no matter where you come from, we still stay at the bottom. That created that birth center because we die more. We had the privilege of taking care of a Guatemalan woman, when, Kiki, maybe 6 months ago, who came into our birth center, and we were so excited to have her because we created that partly for her, because I do really believe in equity. And she came in, and we were able to treat her like a human, treat her family like a human, get her a birth certificate without 1 million people in there in her business making her feel unsafe, and take excellent good care of this sister. She came back for her 3-day visit, and she was so excited because the family that she worked for, because she was a nanny, said she could come back to work right away with her baby in tow. And I was pissed. But I couldn't show her that because people got to do what they have to do. But the point is, we can't say that we're looking out, we're supporting people only to use them for free labor. Across the board. We have to take care of each other across the board. And as we become 2% of the population, and maybe even 1%, remember that we're still there. And the people that you're overlooking are the people who lived there, moved there, and couldn't move because the county redlined them. These are people who couldn't leave Marin City. They had to stay in Marin City. These are people who are sick because they had bad food. These are people who are sick because they didn't have access to medicine, but they marched. And they got those things not only for themselves, but for all of us. See, because if it was about equity, we could fix Marin City right away. Why should they have access to any food but good food? It's nothing to send only good food into a community of 3,000 people. It's nothing to make an educational system that will serve 3,000, less than 3,000, just nothing. If we really wanted equity, this is a rich county. It's ridiculous. Ever since I came here 6 years ago, I've been seeing that stupid slide of Ross versus Marin City. It's nothing if we care to send resources to a community of 3,000 people. But we don't care. That's it. They said Marin was the highest performing with the greatest disparity. We don't care. We have the money. We have the money to build houses. We have all of that. We don't have the will. And so the Democratic people in here, I'm asking you to help us have the will. And when you have the will, because we're 2%.
So that was super powerful, and I hope it made some of you emotional, because when I listened to it back, it did. And so I wanted to give a little bit of an introduction of how I know Javon. And it's so important for me to do this because I was working in Marin City at the Times, and she talked a lot about Marin City. Actually, it's funny to me because she talked about this graphic comparing Marin City to Ross, and I actually created that graphic. And I know, I'm tired of seeing it too. And it was taken by the county, and it's been used over and over and over, showing that Ross is one of the wealthiest communities compared to Marin City. And I created it because it was a community of almost the same size as Marin City, and the disparities were incredible. At that time, I think there was a 17 or 18 year life expectancy difference, and then there was a lot of other indicators there as far as home ownership, median household income, poverty levels, and youth health, adult health, access to care. And when she said that, it was it was so important to me because I created that graphic probably like 5 years ago. And it's something that we keep seeing over and over, and it has circulated Marin County, and the state and the federal government. And, you know, it is exhausting to constantly talk about these equity issues without consideration for the populations are there. So, Javon came in to run the clinic, and I'm not gonna lie, girl, I was a little skeptical at first, but it was just because I didn't know her well enough. Both of us have had a really alternative kind of viewpoint on how equity works, and then getting away from talking about equality and getting toward equity. And that, I would say, is something that we really bonded on because, you know, I fought a lot of people. We've both fought a lot of people in order to get Marin, after 20 years of conversation. I was just talking to my mom about this, about how for 20 years working in a clinic, they talked about how Marin City was not served. And no one would listen. You know, the clinic was right in the canal. It moved a couple times, I should say. It was in downtown Centerville, moved to the canal. And so, and I'm not saying that the Latino Hispanic population shouldn't get services, but it was completely neglecting the fact that Marin City had a limited access to care. And then, you know, so when I was down there, we were both in tangent, you know, working toward these public health issues of, you know, I'm going to say it, fighting the county, as, you know, the populations that are ignored, and fighting the editorial board of the Marin IJ, who refused to reflect any of the positive work that was going on in Marin City. And, you know, advocating at the state of California started a Department of Health Equity. And I do want to mention, because the entire time I was sitting in that equity conference, all I could think about was the Native populations. Also, never mentioned at all, ever in a hot second in that equity conference. And again, and I do just want to say that obviously immigrant health, security, safety is important, but, and if you saw one of my posts, I put the forgotten populations, and Native Americans weren't mentioned at all. And they show the worst health outcomes in the entire country systematically. They have the worst alcoholism and drug use. And, you know, I could spend an entire show talking about that, but I think that both of us really recognize the fact that not only the county of Marin, the county of Sonoma, all the surrounding counties are not necessarily addressing these populations in a way that I find to be, or Javon found to be, an effective manner. And so that's kind of the basis of my show, is that, you know, we need to talk about these populations. We are talking a lot about immigrants in the news right now. And again, that's a really important thing, but we're forgetting our Native Americans. We're forgetting our Black people that were forced to be here. They didn't immigrate here. And like she said, there are Black people that immigrated here, or African people, Haitian, but we forget about the people that were forced to be here, or the people that were here so much in our health outreach. And, you know, working with I got to call them out, the Department of Health Equity, they had such a misunderstanding and a misrepresentation of the Native populations that when they distribute a funding source, they were so disconnected from what would be effective that they didn't have any response for a technical assistance provider initially, because in the state of California, Northern California, the tribes are very different because they were segmented into a bunch of smaller tribes. So getting funding is very difficult because you're talking about servicing 1,200 people versus the Navajo Nation, which is thousands of people. And so there's a power struggle there. But further, what really upset me was that the state of California did not have they made it very clear they didn't have proper representation in the Department of Health Equity for Native Americans, because they didn't understand the funding structure of tribes, where they had this planning grant where you had to have a budget less than $500,000. Tell me one tribe in the entire nation that has a general fund that's less than $500. And most of the support nonprofits that do happen, they do not have a budget of $500,000. You'd have to be just starting out. I mean, most of these tribes have multi-million dollars worth of grant funding, and that's not to say they're wealthy or they're okay. That is them getting by. And what people don't understand about the native populations on reservation is that not only are most of them in advert poverty, I hear constantly this argument, well, oh, they all have casinos, they're so rich, and that's ridiculous. There are certain tribes that, do very well, like the Grayton, band of Pomo Indians, that's one that's brought to the forefront. But the other thing is they're very philanthropic as well, because they realize that their fellow Native brothers and sisters don't have the same opportunity that they had in order to build that casino. And so, there's this skewed idea that Native Americans are wealthy without people understanding that they're actually completely unhealthy, and they live in advert poverty, and they're still getting commodity boxes which have terrible food in them. Many Native Americans rely on that. I heard an argument the other day that, not the other day, it was a couple months ago, but someone said, well, why don't they just leave? Why are they staying on reservation? Why don't they just leave? And that is a ridiculous and naive statement. What? You're overtly poor, you are subject to the, and the same thing that she was saying about drugs in the African American population is that now our Native populations are subject to the heroin and meth issues that we have in this country. It's been a long time. Alcoholism, because there's a loss of culture. And there's a loss, and if people don't know, I've talked about this before, but Native Americans were put into institutions where their culture was literally tried to be taught out of them. And if you talk to Native people, they'll say that my great-grandma were put into these boarding schools where literally their language was stripped from them, their identity was stripped from them, their culture was stripped from them by white people. That's what we did. We came into this country and committed mass genocide, and the same thing, and we force a lot of these black people to come into this country as well. And if you're offended by what I'm saying, then you have a misunderstanding and a problem, because like Javon showed us, we have to start having these really hard conversations, because we're constantly saying that we need equity, we need to service these populations, we need to figure it out, but it's ridiculous, because we could solve all these problems if we really wanted to. Marin County is an amazing example, because they are just a wealthy county. And again, 20 plus years we've been talking about the lack of access to services for Marin City. It's been ignored. And again, we fought very hard to get that recognition for all the great work that's going, but also you can't neglect a community in a wealthy county just because it gets bad PR, which was absolutely ridiculous. So that's kind of the background. I gave you the health equity definition versus equality. They're very different. But I also just pulled, I promised it wasn't going to be a huge data-driven one, but I did want to give some vital statistics about the Black and Native populations in Marin County, Petaluma, and Sonoma County, because I am going to bring this back home. So in Marin County, the Black population is 2.8%, but I do want to point out that includes San Quentin. And if you want to go back and watch my show on, the cradle to prison paradigm that we see, you can. But I always want to point out that statistic does include San Quentin, and a lot of our Black men in this country are incarcerated. The Native population is 0.6%. In Sonoma County, the Black population is 1.6%, and the Native population is 1.3%. We do, of course, have tribes in Sonoma County, in case you're wondering, and there is tribal land. In Petaluma, the Black population is 1.4%, and the Native population is 0.6%. So we are kind of talking about these very small, forgotten populations, and that's why Javon mentioned it, that's why I am mentioning it, because these really are populations that we don't talk about. Even within the fires, and again, I don't want to upset people, and it's not to say this wasn't talked about by certain groups, but the first group I thought about when I was working in the shelter during the fires was what about renters with no renter's insurance? And the shelter I was working at was primarily people of color. They were primarily renters, and I would venture to guess a lot of them had to leave because they didn't have the means to find somewhere else to stay. And, and I would like to find some way to follow up on that, but we don't have the data on that. But that was the first population, and I have said it to so many people in the last year that they didn't even think about that. They didn't think about the poor people who were renters and had no renter's insurance and now are displaced by the fires. They lost everything they had. Like so many, and I'm not saying there's so many other people that lost everything they had, whether they had the insurance to cover it or didn't. And I'm not saying it wasn't traumatic, it wasn't devastating, I'm not saying any of that, but there was this forgotten population, and perhaps it was a small percent. I don't think it was that small of a population, but it was a population that was forgotten in this process. And like I said, I'm assuming a lot of those people had to leave because they were stuck. I mean, what do you do if you don't have renter's insurance? And even if you do have renter's insurance, what do you do when your housing's gone? And what do you do? I know so many people that fell victim to the fact that they may have been renting, but, everyone had a family member, or the homeowners lost their own home and they had to move in. And so this is a huge part of this story. And I should have mentioned that I went from working in Marin City to working in Hopland for a tribe. So a lot of this hits really close to home, and I feel like it's just so timely that I heard that talk yesterday at an equity conference. And, I was thinking about the whole time, like, what about Native Americans? They're not immigrants. I mean, perhaps some of them came up from Mexico, but if you're actually a Native American, you're not an immigrant. You were here. You were here when all this happened. And so why do we keep forgetting about those populations of people that are here? And again, have the worst health outcomes. Black people and Native people have the worst health outcomes. Native people have the worst health outcomes. We put them on the worst land. We separated them. We tore them from their culture. And they experience some of the most high levels of poverty in the entire country. The highest levels of poverty, drug use, alcohol use. And that's sad. If that doesn't trigger something inside of you, then you're unwilling to have hard conversations. And this is what we're facing in this country, is that we keep claiming that we can't help people. If we wanted to help people, we would. But we don't want to. We don't want to help these people. Why is it that Native Americans are living on these reservations with close to no resources? That's because of us. And if you can't take ownership over that and you don't want to help, then you're part of the problem. And I know that people are saying, well, I live paycheck to paycheck. I do this, and I get that. I get that. I get it's hard to live in this county. It's hard to live in the North Bay. It's very expensive. A lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck. But if you don't care, I'm not asking you to give money. I'm not asking you to do anything. You need to care. You need to be able to be a part of the conversations. And that's the breakdown, is that we can't have, everything. All things holy. If I have to hear one more politician talking about working across the aisle, I am going to gouge my eyes out, because very few of them actually believe in that. We're completely unwilling to have conversations with people that disagree with us or don't align with us 100%. And that is the issue, and that's where you run into where you can't have these hard conversations where we're talking about people are living in poverty. There is a black population in Marin County, one of the wealthiest counties in the entire state, if not the wealthiest county in the state, and ranked the most healthy in the state, that are living in poverty. And like it was said in the recording, is that we did luckily work towards having a Target that has a grocery store in it, but for all those years, people were eating out of, after the flea market ended, and even before that, it was considered a food desert because they had to go all the way into Sausalito or all the way to Mill Valley to eat, to buy food at Safeway. And this Target was open, but before that, people were living out of the dollar store and the fast food that was there in the area. And that's a tragic thing. These are our neighboring, and I know that it's happening in Sonoma County too. Everyone keeps talking about how Sonoma County is poor and struggling. I will say, though, that I do feel that the County of Sonoma is a lot more innovative and forward-thinking in what they're doing in order to solve issues, and I've been in many a meeting with staff. Marin County is not known for hiring young people. Sonoma County has made an effort to do so in order to have that forward-thinking, that different, kind of a feeling. And again, this is my opinion. I'm not representing one thing or the other, but this has been my career. And there's a reason I'm in this career is because I can provide a service. My family went from being poor, and my parents were able to provide us with the American dream. We went from being poor to being upper middle class in Petaluma. That is a thing of the past. I'm a millennial. The thought of owning a home or being able to pay off my student loan debt, that is something of the past. I don't see that happening. And I'm a white woman. I'm part Mexican, but I'm white. I've always been associated with being white, and that has provided me so much advantage in my life. So much. And that's why I feel that I have to use that advantage to serve populations and advocate for populations that don't have that. Because if you're a person of color, the odds of you owning a home, even going to college, or even finishing high school are very low. And again, the Native populations, they have a lot of recidivism as well as going back into jail over and over. And there's a really high dropout rate from high school. And we see a lot of the same things with the black population, especially nationally. California in general has higher levels of educational attainment, which again is people staying in school, graduating high school. But across the nation, the outcomes are even worse. So I want to bring this back to the local level because I feel that constantly we consider public health, equity, all these issues I'm talking about to be county level issues or state level issues or federal level issues, and that is insane. Each city should be taking a look at the health equity. These are vital statistics. This isn't hard information to find. And I am going to be hypercritical after this election of our city council and our mayor of looking at these issues at a local level. Because, again, the information's there. Or go out and do a survey. Go out and see how people are living. Go out and see, how, and I've talked about it, the difference between the neighborhood I grew up in and Cherry Valley census tract. The life expectancy is significant difference because where you live matters. And in this census tract where I grew up, where on the east side, where there's the Kmart and the McDonald's, you're surrounded by gas stations and fast food restaurants and, everything there. There's the Safeway there, but it can be expensive. There's a Trader Joe's there, but it can be expensive for people, inhibiting. And that's going on in our own city. So the fact that the local government doesn't address that, I don't want to say they don't care, but I get the feeling they don't care. I think that we don't care on a global level, let alone at the local level, where we have people that are suffering in our city and we're unwilling to even look at it. And again, we're reliant on the county and the state to provide services. That's crazy. There is funding out there for the city to address these issues. And I get really passionate about it because this public health issue is constantly a global, well, I don't really know what that means. And I get it. It's a very broad thing. It's everything from epidemiology, which is collecting all the data, to how do we make people healthy? And there's infectious disease. That's another one that people hear about. Vector diseases, which is, about contamination of water, mosquito bites. Like that's what vector control is. But at the base level, it's about health equity. And that's what we're transitioning to, thank goodness, after all these years. And I really do believe that it needs to be taken on at a city level. One of my pet projects after the election is going to be making the downtown Petaluma Boulevard and Kentucky corridor smoke-free. I think that in the city of Petaluma, it's ridiculous that people can still walk down the street and smoke right in our downtown corridor. And, when people say, well, we don't have the police, we don't have it doesn't actually have to be punitive. I helped write a non-smoking policy in Marin City that covered our entire governmental campus, including the park. And it actually becomes, it regulates itself. Because you put the signs up, you have to make a minor investment. The state of California actually provides signs to you, helps you write the policy, which is very simple. It's like one paragraph policy talking about the corridors. And you put the signs up. And then it starts self-regulating because people, you know, they see the signs, and people are relatively respectful about it, but I don't think you should be able to smoke at all. People throw cigarette butts in our planters downtown. Those are supposed to have flowers in them, not cigarette butts. Cigarette butts are thrown on the ground, which is incredibly unhealthy. And, you know, I also worked in Vallejo to make all the parks smoke-free, because people throw their butts in the sand, and then dogs eat them, kids eat them, and it's very, very unhealthy. It's very bad for the environment. So that's just one of my pet projects when it goes through. I shouldn't call it a pet project, because it's a big deal for me, because I have worked in non-smoking policies in other areas, and then also really enforcing the fact that you're supposed to be a distance from the door. You shouldn't have to walk out from somewhere and have someone smoking 5 feet, because second, third-hand smoke, we've shown through data, is more harmful than actually being first-hand smoke. So these are kind of the issues that I'm tired of the city of Petaluma saying they're too poor to address these issues. And I heard it over and over and over again, and I'll get a little bit more into it on my show on Election Day, but I just keep hearing the city of Petaluma is poor. Why? Why is it poor? I get it. Everyone said, oh, well, the recession happened everywhere. Do you see the housing prices? Do you see the tax base that we have now? And this city's poor. None of that makes any sense. You want to know how much the city manager makes in this city? $250,000 a year. You want to know how much the city attorney makes, not full-time? Between $230,000 and $250,000 a year. You want to know how much the assistant city manager makes in this city? Upwards of $200,000 a year, and we're a poor city. Now, I get it. We have a $45 million city budget, but I'll tell you right now, if you were the CEO of a company and you weren't generating any revenue to not make this a poor city, you'd be fired within a year. Done. I don't know the city manager personally. I am not trying to knock him, but for that salary, if you are not bringing revenue in and we're constantly being told this is a poor city, you should have been fired 9 years ago. And I really hope very passionately that the city council, after elected, takes hiring someone that's very business-minded very seriously. Very, 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 very seriously. Because the situation we are in is because of the leadership. And all of these people we all went through the recession. We were all there. Cities went bankrupt. Things happened. I get it. Everyone says the city manager brought us out of this huge turmoil for over 10 years. Okay. I got that. The recession was hard. And I'm not downplaying it. I came out of school during the recession. I couldn't find a job. I came out of my master's program. I had $100,000. Well, at that time it was $75,000. It's accruing interest faster than I'm paying it off. I had $75,000 worth of school debt, and I couldn't find a job. I get it, the recession was hard, but I'm very disappointed that we keep saying that this is a poor city. And Sonoma County, too, is struggling, but the Sonoma County demographics are very different than the city of Petaluma. The city of Petaluma is now reflecting Marin County. It's arguable, but it's starting to surpass Novato in the standard of living and the housing prices. It's not quite there yet. But I would venture to guess by the next census, which comes out in 2020, we're going to surpass that level. So, I want to bring it back full circle to the point of this show, talking about these forgotten populations, because they're forgotten at the local level, too, in Petaluma. We're not even talking about health, let alone talking about the minority populations in health. We're a sanctuary city. And again, immigration is a very important thing, but why not talk about the people that, the Native American populations, the Black populations, why not talk about those people too? Because they're completely being left behind. And, I wrote down here that the Native American populations and the Black populations, but I saw it firsthand over the last 3 years, that the whole funding structure and funding culture for Native Americans is completely misunderstood. I talked about the state of California's huge oversight and misrepresentation of developing funding and technical assistance. And, that's a major issue, because a lot of these populations aren't being represented from agencies that have the money. And even if it's grant funding, and I should say that the city of Petaluma, it's $45 million in general funds, which doesn't include, so just for an understanding point, the general fund doesn't include grants that are outside of that. So for example, the police department was just talking about having to get grants. You know, for example, I've written grants for the Department of Justice for police departments. So that's not included in the general fund. That is a supplementary funding source. Same if it was fire or parks or whatever it might be. It's not a bond measure. It would be, well, it could be a bond measure too. I shouldn't say that because that's also a form of set aside if it is set aside. It's not in the general fund. So, you know, I really, and this is, I was just talking to someone and they asked me, they said, do you have fear about what you do? Do you have fear about the retaliation of what you say and what you do and how you present yourself? And I think that this was one of those shows where, because I was talking about what the show is going to be on, and I think this is one of the shows that they were inquiring about, like, are you going to be living in fear about the retaliation? Absolutely not. Because these are the things we need to talk about. And I've said it in so many of my shows. We refuse to talk about these issues, and they are so important. And I'm tired of talking around. I'm tired of beating around the bush. I'm tired of having to be nice and cordial, and, you know, I'm very diplomatic, and I feel like I've been that way today too, but I'm a very objective person. We have to address these issues. What world are we living in? And I swear, please stop saying the city of Petaluma is poor unless you're willing to provide solutions. Stop saying that we're working across the aisle unless you are trying to provide solutions. We're not working across the aisle in this city. We're not working across the aisle in the state. We're not working across the aisle in the government. We're too busy blaming the other side for what's going on. We're unwilling to sit across the table from someone that doesn't support us in an election in order to hear why they don't. We just neglect to show up. And that is my major issue with, and it goes all the way from local. We are fed propaganda in the city of Petaluma, just like the federal government showed us in the last election, and people gloss over it and they say, well, I'm going to vote on my party lines in a nonpartisan election. These are the major issues that we're facing, and that's why I try to bring it back to the Petaluma level. We are here in Petaluma being fed propaganda, lies, misinformation, people fighting, people voting based on partisan lines, people voting for just one side of the conversation. This is a nonpartisan election, and even if it isn't, why can't you vote for whoever aligns with you most? Why can't you just vote for 2 people instead of 3? Why can't you not vote for school board if you don't know what you're voting for? These are all things you can do. You don't need to be fed, and we're a week before the election, and I know there's many people that haven't voted. A lot of the absentee ballots have gone in, but there's plenty of people that have not voted yet, have not gone to the polls, and this is the conversation you need to have with yourself. I am not telling people who to vote for. I am not telling you to vote one way or the other. I am telling you to vote, and vote for those who align with you best. Vote for the propositions that align with your feelings the best. Have conversations with people that you don't agree with. Have conversations with people that you're not voting for, because you can learn, and we have a very split city. I think that's something that we know very well. The last election for mayor was so close, and so we have a split city, but we still have these camps. I call them camps. It's like we have one camp, we have the other camp, and if one camp doesn't disagree with the other, then we automatically don't want to talk. And I can't reiterate that enough. I mean, make educated decisions. Again, you don't have to vote for everything. We are such an integral and sensitive time, both at a local and a national level, and this is going to impact the decisions. And I always stress that people don't respect the impact of their local officials as much as they should. Whether it's city, supervisor, state, we don't focus enough on how important that is when it's so important. Like, these are going to affect, again, I was talking about public health. You want to continue having administration that doesn't even consider it an issue? I don't know. Is it really an administration issue? Is it an advocacy issue? Is it people in our planning department or on our planning commission starting to look at how do we actually integrate these things into our decisions? Is it about restructuring our committees with the city? Is it about putting people on the committees that actually have experience doing those things? I don't know. at this point, but you need to make a decision. We need to make a decision based on what we're looking for in this city. And I want to see change. I'm done. I'm done with how things have been going. I have lived off and on in the city since I was 7 years old, and I'm 32, hence the name of, my radio personality. And it has changed in demographics and income and all that kind of stuff, development. But what hasn't changed alongside and within the last 10 to 15 years, there's been no accommodation for that population growth or that development growth, and that's just how I see it. And I know I'm not the only one that sees it that way. I own a small company here. It's hard enough to own a company in the state of California, and I'm not knocking it. I know we have one person that deals with the small business and economic development in our city, which is a huge issue to me too. One person should be charged with that whole thing. We have a lot of businesses here, but there's no incentive. People are already leaving California, and now a lot of businesses are leaving California, and now we're in Petaluma where the cost of living is increasing so much. And I've said over and over, and I'm not knocking, I call them traditional brick and mortars, but we're talking about boutiques, restaurants. They get so much recognition in our media. So much. Every time a new restaurant opens, and I've seen multiple articles about the same restaurant, but what about everyone else? What about our nonprofits that aren't recognized like they should be? What about these small, non-traditional, who cares if it's one person? Who cares if it's an independent consultant? Who cares if they manage a big team of people? Like, why aren't they being recognized? And again, I kind of went on a tangent there, but I do think it goes full circle because we are ignoring so many people in our society, and it's really unfortunate. And we do feed off what is brought to the forefront in the media, which is kind of why I bring up the media coverage locally, is that's what we feed off of. That's what we care about, is what the major media is showing us. But that is such a small portion of the issue, if at all part of the issue. I watch people post every single day, and I don't post anything about this because it's exhausting. They're posting about Trump's doing this, Trump's doing that, this person's doing that, this person's doing that. That's exhausting for people. We all know what's going on. We all know the agenda. So why not encourage people to be positive and realize that everything is not terrible in the world and that we can make change? Because posting all these things and talking about all this negativity and ignoring so many of the major issues we're having, health equity is what I care about most because it impacts everything in our lives and our success. Why not talk about those issues? And you want to talk about them? Come to me. I will hook you up with people that can talk about those issues. I don't care what Trump is doing. It's not that I don't care, but I'm tired of hearing about it. I'm so tired of hearing about it when we have all these issues right here in Petaluma, right here in Sonoma County, right here in the North Bay that are so pertinent. Like, let's talk about all of it. You gotta post 27 times a day, post 27 times a day. But let's talk about the issues that are going on here, and don't fear having these conversations. Like I said, someone asked me, "Do you fear the retaliation?" Nope. You don't have to watch my show. You don't have to listen. You don't have to do any of those things. Like, I stand up for. I am so passionate about what I do, and this is why I do what I do. That's why I worked in Marin City. That's why I worked in Hopland. That's why I still work with the tribes. That's why I care about children of color in this county. Is because that's what I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about moving the needle. I'm passionate about bringing these issues to light, which is what my whole show is about, is talking about very difficult things, but also making the issues tangible. So why not that? Why not talk about these things from time to time? And yes, let's do what we can to flip the Congress. That's something I think everyone here can agree on, and let's do what we can. We have the triangle, the powers, which is the judiciary, the Senate, and the president, and we have to do what we can to strengthen those things. I know a lot of people are discouraged right now. A lot of people are discouraged, but don't get discouraged, because then you're defeated. If you're discouraged, you're unwilling to communicate, then you get defeated. And I'm not saying don't feel it. Like, we all feel it, and I've gotten I'm going to say what I'm going to say, and I've got a lot of kickback on this, is that when people are highly emotional, they can't communicate. And that is sociology. I am not saying that in vain. That is sociology. When people are highly emotional, they cannot effectively communicate. And what we need right now in the country is doing everything you can to calm yourself so that we can communicate. Sorry. I'm ranting and raving with no water. So in closing, I wanted to point out, going back to Javon's speech, which is one of the major reasons I was talking about doing a show on health equity, but I kind of changed the focus about these, naming it not just a nation of immigrants intentionally after I heard her speak. And one of the major things that I feel is that, and someone I follow on social media said, is that change doesn't come from a blue wave or a red wave. Change doesn't come from anger. And right now, it's not like she said she was resistant. It's not about not being resistant. It's about being so rebellious and such a martyr that you can't hear anymore. And the key for change is inspiration. And he talked about how people like MLK, and that was not 100% hunky-dory. A lot of people don't know the actual story. They haven't listened to all the speeches. He went to jail. He did those things. But what he did do is he provided a powerful inspiration to the people to make change. And that was what was important. It wasn't about fighting the Democrats or the Republicans, fighting over what is what. And I will end, because I am running out of time. I will end with saying again, those who are unwilling to show up to have a conversation across the table from someone that is not supporting them necessarily or does not agree with them is the problem with our country and a failure in our, whether it's local to the national level. So thank you so much for joining me. Please send questions over if you have them after. I know these are hard issues. Again, you are listening to DG the 30-something. My show is called The State of the Union. And I will be on air next week for the election. The results will not be coming out, but you'll hear a little bit more about how I feel about issues if you didn't get enough today. So again, you are listening to KPCA LP, Petaluma 103.3 FM, and please join us whenever you can. And as I said last time, we need donors in order to keep this going. And I believe that it is something that helps maintain democracy in this country, is having these voices and letting people join the conversation. So thanks so much for your time.